Hey, everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
It's still me, Jackie, 2024.
Hi, it's me, Diana. Hello.
Oh, boy, and we are all here sitting around the table with a new recording set up for the show. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we pick a topic and review some relevant articles. I'm cutting right to the chase. I'm gonna cut out some of the time that we spend bantering, because this week's episode is all about thinning, schedule thinning to be exact. Schedule thinning in the process of improving and moving along with your functional communication response training practice, FCRTP, as I like to call it.
I love when people say FCT training. That's like one of my favorite things.
Well, you know, I'm always doing FCT training, FCRTTP, because it's a program. It's the ST, FCRPTT, PRTX. The X is for extra useful. Extension. So this week, we are going to talk about some articles related to what do we do with our super great FCR program that kind of hits a wall when the rate of responding is much too high to transition to real life. And what will we be discussing specifically, Diana?
Okay, so we have a few articles to review today. I'm going to tell you about them in no particular order. They include a component analysis of schedule thinning during functional communication training, just kidding, by Betts, Fisher, Rohn, Mintz, and Owen. That was published in JABA 2013. Also, updated recommendations for reinforcement schedule thinning following functional communication training by Kranak and Brown. That was published in Behavior Analysis and Practice pretty recently, 2023. Functional communication training during reinforcement schedule thinning, an analysis of 25 applications by Greer, Fisher, Ziani, Owen, and Jones. And that was in JABA 2016. And finally, reinforcement schedule thinning following treatment with functional communication training by Hanley, Iwata, and Thompson. That was in JABA 2001.
Excellent. So,
I love all of those.
they're all great.
Oh yeah, these are some solid articles.
Oh,
We are standing on solid ground.
that's right. It's not thinning ground.
Nope.
So
It's spring after all.
it's thawing ground. So let's do a little background information as to the basics of schedule thinning and maybe some of the components of these articles that are in the review section, but we're not going to discuss at super length.
I do want to say before we do that
Yeah.
this was a listener request.
Hey,
Oh.
good.
So thank
Thanks.
you, listeners.
Thank you, listeners.
Thank you, listener.
There was
Just-
multiple.
In the singular.
Just you. Everyone else. What have you done for us lately?
What have you done for us?
It's a really important topic because we obviously talk a lot about functional communication training and how important it is to teach an alternative response if the one that has previously been accessing reinforcement is dangerous. But it can't always stop there, right? Is this what you were about to say, Rob, or can I go ahead and say it?
You go ahead and keep saying it.
Yeah, because certainly we usually train new responses on an FR1 schedule, but it's not always feasible, functional, or in the client's best interest to continue reinforcing a response on an FR1 schedule, right? So we teach someone to ask for a goldfish and it works. It's amazing. Now they're manning for goldfish all over the place. And the question almost immediately then follows, well, I can't give them a goldfish every time they ask for one. It's too many goldfish. What do I do now? Right? That happens with goldfish. It happens with iPad. It happens with asking for a break as well. There are only so much reinforcement that can be provided, and it's ultimately going to be beneficial to fade that schedule out. But how do you do that without creating an extinction burst, right? Or potentially preventing other opportunities for learning to occur? So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Excellent.
I'm excited to scan.
I'm excited too, because again, I think this is a highly relevant question that comes up a lot for clinicians and for parents, But the good news is there are several things that one can do in order to get that schedule thinned out safely and effectively.
All right. So why don't we get started going back to 2001 with Hanley, Iwata, and Thompson and sort of talk about
Dream team.
the article that is going to lead to the rest of the articles that we discuss in terms of, here's an idea, what do you all think? And people like that idea, so they continue to explore it in future research.
Yeah. So this is at this point a 23-year-old article.
It still reads very modern.
It does still read very
It does,
modern.
with one exception that I'm going to mention to
Is
you.
it that it has multiple experiments within one article?
Oh, no, that's just a Hanley. That feels like a Hanley.
Don't know. I wrote it in my notes for that one. I wrote it in the notes for the one I'm going to I'm going to be the primary discussant. No.
Whenever I have students review a Hanley article, like for class, they'll like do a presentation on it. I always have to specify, just do study 1, just do study 3, because there's always multiple studies in there. But this one was merciful in that there's only one participant in study 1 and only 2 participants in study 2. So I'm going to attempt to move through this so that everybody can keep track of what's going on and not be too lengthy about it. But as I've already laid up like the purpose of this study for all of us, right? Which is we got to figure out how to thin out some of those schedules of reinforcement, because functional communication training is great, but it leaves people on an FR1. It's not always feasible to maintain that. So they wanted to evaluate, how might we thin out these schedules? Let's make a comparison between a few different options. So the options that they looked at were just implementing a delay to reinforcement, starting at an FR1 schedule and leaning it out. Number 2, evaluating a graduated fixed interval schedule of reinforcement, seeing what that did to responding. And then numbers 3 and 4 were a comparison between a graduated multiple schedule arrangement and a graduated mixed schedule arrangement.
Ooh, let's talk about multiple versus mixed schedules.
Okay.
Can I say that every article talks about multiple versus mixed schedules, and every article tells you exactly what the difference is between them. And it is very obvious and clear. Yet the second I was done reading these, I would spend a good 5 minutes saying, the mixed is there's something discriminable. No, that's multiple. Or is that mixed? I think it's both. Maybe they're together. I don't know why. These two terms, I wish they'd come up with different names for them that didn't sound exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, because they are almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's also the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's only like a few defining characteristics of them, one of which is the discriminative stimuli with the successive schedules.
Yes.
Right? The multiple has discriminative stimuli associated with each schedule, which then will be associated with each terminal reinforcer, which may be different or the same, but most of the time it's different. With the mixed schedule, there is no such thing. You just have no idea what's going on. There's no signaling.
This is a trivia topic. I think we're going to save this for one where it's like we describe a situation and you got to pick your schedule.
If you
see if everyone gets 0 on that round, and we'll all feel better about ourselves.
So in class, I found this really awesome infographic on Instagram that talked about all the compound schedules, like adjunctive, mixed, chain, tandem, about gym going.
Oh, cool.
Right?
Yeah.
So I just thought that was fascinating. GYM, like
not GEM or JIM.
No, going to the gym and like leg day versus arm day, and
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
cool.
like a multiple schedule would be if you look at your calendar, Monday says gym day, Tuesday says leg day. Oh no, those. No.
I don't
Monday says arm day, Tuesday says leg day. Those are the discriminative stimulus that are going to tell you what's going to produce reinforcement at the gym.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And the mixed schedule, you
You'd show up and someone would throw weights at you and you'd be like, where do they go?
You're like,
on my arms, my legs.
Got one.
Turns out it was arm day. Right. So there's only one schedule available at a time here, right? And what the reinforcement schedule is either going to be readily available and apparent because there's some type of discriminative stimulus available in the environment. Very often in the, the research world, it's like a color that's present, right? In a multiple schedule, you're going to see an SD, but then in a mixed schedule, you're not. You don't know what the schedule is. You're just going to be behaving and encountering the reinforcement, but you'll never know at that particular moment in time which schedule is in place other than the contingencies that you're contacting. And I think I can kind of remember that that's the mixed schedule because everything is just mixed up together. You can't tell. The multiple schedule, that one, I don't have a mnemonic to help me out. with it.
It's because you're going to be using multiple schedules, and I will tell you what they are. Whereas mixed, it's like
Who knows?
It's all reinforcement schedules. We
yeah.
just threw them in the box.
Did all the reinforcement
Yeah.
schedules.
Who knows what will
mixed
come
bag
out? You
is
don't
the
know. I'm
mixed
just
schedule.
going to dump this box out, and there's a reinforcement schedule, but which one you don't know. They're all mixed up.
Yep. And then they arbitrarily switch. So a chain schedule requires termination of the first schedule that first functions as a reinforcer to access the second schedule, but that's not the case here, so don't worry about that.
Right. And the chain schedule also uses a discriminant stimulus.
Yes.
Whereas tandem does not.
Correct.
And we can't find really any real life tandem schedules in the world. And if someone does, there was a leg day. I mean, there was a gym one, but it was
Not real.
hot. It was like a hot mess, right?
Hot,
Because
yeah,
I think
yeah.
tandem schedule equals hot mess
Okay.
in the real world.
Yeah. But fortunately for us, we're only going to talk about multiple and mixed today, so you're welcome. So like I said, there were 3 participants in the study broken up across study 1 and study 2. All of the participants were adults living in state-run facilities. They had significant support needs and they engaged in either aggression or SIB, but the self-injurious behavior was the one that was the focus for this study. So in study 1, there was one participant, Karen. She was 29. She was diagnosed with profound intellectual disability. She communicated via gestures, and she engaged in face and head hitting, which were the behaviors that were targeted for decrease here. It was thought that her behavior was evoked by denied access to tangible food items and therefore was likely maintained by access to those. And they evaluated this via a reversal design. Then it was an AB, CB, DB, E design. But I'm going to tell you what those conditions actually are.
A, B, A, B, A, D, A, B, F.
So in study 1, they did a quickie FA. Didn't call it a quickie. But definitely it was like the germ of an ISCA, right? It was a pairwise comparison. So they looked at a comparison of just a test and a control condition in which there was continuous access to food and a condition in which there was contingent reinforcement for engaging in self-injury reinforced with food. And this is the one thing that I'm noting here as like, I feel like as a throwback, is they said non-fat popcorn was the item. When is the last time you heard something referred to as non-fat?
I haven't.
Right?
Yeah.
It was like such a craze of the 2000s.
It really was.
To talk about that. Now it would be like organic, whole grain,
Right.
GMO-free popcorn was used instead. So that was the only thing where I was like, oh, wow, like that actually does show its age. Otherwise, I don't think so in this particular study. And the FA was very clear that there was a tangible function to the behavior. So rates were much higher in the contingent reinforcement condition. Then they taught Karen to engage in the differential learning response, right? So she used a micro switch that said, more please, and that resulted in 10 seconds access to the bowl of popcorn. Initially, they used physical guidance to teach the skill. They faded that out. And at the end of the DRA training phase, she could respond independently with an FR1 reinforcement schedule, right? So often that's like where training ends. And you're like, we did it. We taught the response. But you can't have popcorn, even if it's non-fat. You can't have popcorn all day long. Sometimes there's other things that need to get done. So that's where things got interesting here, is this was condition C, D, and E that were then alternated thereafter, in which they evaluated these different schedule thinning conditions. So condition C was the FR1 with the delay. So the delay increased from 1 second to 2, 4, 8, 16, 25 seconds. And that's as far as they got with this condition. The D condition was the fixed interval schedule. So now we've divorced the FCR from the reinforcer and are now providing the reinforcer. Well, it's not divorced, but now it's the time is increasing on its own rather than tied to the response specifically. But after the response that occurs after 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 25, 35, 46, and 58 seconds was then allowed access to the popcorn. Otherwise, it did not produce access to the popcorn. And so they got a little bit further with that one, as I just stated. And then they did the multiple schedule thinning condition. So here they started out with an FR1 portion in which it was a white card was present. You got popcorn on the FR1 schedule, or a no availability condition in which a red card was present, and that was an extinction condition. So responding did not produce access to the reinforcer, and then they faded that out over a longer period of time. So in order to evaluate this, they looked at the number of responses per minute of both the FCR and self-injury, and then also the percentage of reinforcers earned and the percentage of the functional communication response that resulted in reinforcement. Because that part's important too, in that if there is a lot of extraneous responding occurring, the behavior is more likely to either be extinguished or potentially be maintained on a very thin schedule, kind of like depending on what's going on there, either one of which behavior is no longer as efficient as it would have been under an FR1 schedule, which we know from other work is less preferred for individuals. So that's important to keep in mind too. Across all of these conditions, C, D, and E, responding for their self-injury decreased. So all of them were effective in that regard. There were a few more bobbles in the level of self-injury under the FR1 delay condition, the C condition that I mentioned first. What they saw with the fixed interval schedule condition is that overall, the number of functional communication responses decreased over time because many of them were no longer being reinforced, right? So they sort of saw that contingency start to diminish a little bit. And then with the multiple schedule, they ultimately saw, like I said, the most efficient responding. So initially, they definitely saw an extinction burst under the extinction condition. So lots and lots of instances of the FCR, but it was not reinforced. However, SIB did remain low. So that is noteworthy. And then eventually, they saw responding stabilize as well as discriminate across the two conditions. So in the then thinned out multiple schedule reinforcement condition, they saw behavior FCR was high or appropriately high, I guess you could say. SIB was low. And then in the extinction, the red card condition, both FCR requests were low and SIB was low. So they said, this seems good. This seems like the approach to use. But a question remained, which is, did we actually need to have those signals in place? Or if we had just done the same type of schedule thinning that we did in the multiple schedule, but without the white card and the red card, would we have seen the same results? So this is where our other two participants came into play. Jake was 34. He was also diagnosed with profound intellectual disability. He communicated with signs or gestures, and self-injury was of concern as he engaged in hand and arm biting. They really weren't sure of the function of his behavior, but because he was a fairly large man and it was fairly dangerous, he also engaged in aggression as well. Often what they called outbursts were reinforced with preferred items just to try to keep everyone safe. And then we had Julie, who was 31. In addition to a profound intellectual disability diagnosis, she also was diagnosed with Angelman syndrome, cerebral palsy, and had a seizure disorder. She used a wheelchair. Her self-injury was banging her hands and wrists on hard surfaces, and they weren't sure of the antecedent, but it did seem like it may have had an attention component to it. So the study design was largely the same here, except that they did not do the FCR delay and the fixed interval. They did the FA just the same structure as the other one. They did the DRA training just the same structure as the other one. Julie had a micro switch. Attention was looked to be a function for her. She had a micro switch that said, "Talk to me, please." And for Jake, tangibles did seem to be a maintaining factor for him. And so he learned the sign for more. So that was the FR1 DRA training condition. And then after that, they did the comparison between the multiple schedule, which is the one with the discriminative stimuli, and the mixed schedule, which is the same thing, just there's no discriminative stimuli. That's it. So they attempted to do a fading out across both of these schedules to see which ones, maintain responding. So the initial rates for both of them were 45 seconds of access to the items, in which the FCR response. Did you like that, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
The FCR response.
My favorite.
It's the FCR training response.
That's correct. Yes, the FCTRTR.
In training.
When they engaged in that learned response, they got access to the reinforcer. So that condition was in place for 45 seconds. Bless you.
Sorry, I
That's
tried,
okay.
tried to block it, but it came too fast.
And then that was followed by 15 seconds of extinction. So when the multiple schedule was in place, they had the white card and the red card out that signaled those conditions. In the mixed schedule, same thing was happening, but there was no indicator of which condition you were in. And then the goal was to fade those schedules down. However, before they did the fading, they looked at the comparison between the two, just at that initial 45-15. And what do you guys think happened? I can wait.
I think that it worked.
Which one?
Obviously the 45.
No,
15.
the multiple or the mixed.
Oh, multiple. Obviously the 45-15. Diana, because that's the schedule it's on.
Obvi.
The only way the mix would have worked is if the mixed is actually a multiple schedule and we're just forgetting which one is which. But I don't think we are. Because
No.
we had that fun talk about
And
multiple versus
I think
mixed.
the only way that a mix would work is if it had like significantly higher rates of reinforcement.
Yeah.
No, but they were the
Significantly.
same.
Right. So if they're
Exactly.
the
So
same,
it
it's
would
going to be multiple.
Exactly. So, it could be that you saw similar rates across the two, but the much more likely thing that's going to happen is that the multiple schedule is more effective. Which just makes common sense, right? Like we've done a lot of research here just to get, and no shade, right? This is an important study, but we did a lot of research to kind of get to a common sense answer, which is, yeah, something signaled in the environment will help you understand what the contingencies are that are in place. And that is what they found. So from there, they said, gosh, looks like, just like we kind of thought all along, the multiple schedule is probably going to be more effective here. So that's one that we're going to use to fade. So then they faded it back to 60 seconds access, 30 seconds extinction, 60, 45, 60, 60, 60, 90, 60, 120, 60, 180, 60, 240. So we ended up with a 5-minute session in which 1 minute of that was the white card where you could trade in for the popcorn or whatever
Sure.
these folks had,
Yep.
attention or additional snacks, versus 4 minutes where it was red card. We're like, oh, sorry, that's just not available right now because the staff, am doing something else, right? Which is very much kind of a real life scenario here. So for both of them, this was effective. For Jake, he had some spikes in SIB initially as they did this fading condition, but ultimately it leveled out and reached the terminal schedule like they were looking for. Looked a lot like Karen's data. For Julie, there was less differentiation. Both of these actually seemed to be relatively effective for her. But when they got in there, they did an extensive within-session analysis to take a look at maybe what was further going on. They said it could be that if she was engaging in high rates of the FCR during times in which it was not available, that could ultimately end up being reinforced once it then switched over into the reinforcement condition in the mixed schedule, which could be ultimately confusing, right? And end up reinforcing these patterns of sort of perpetually manding for the behavior. They saw that in some instances. They also saw some cases in which responding when it flipped over, responding was then no longer reinforced, and they saw sort of mini extinction conditions happening within the session analyses. So overall, her data were just a lot messier in the mixed schedule condition than in the multiple schedule condition. And that led them to conclude that, just as we, again, thought, likely the mixed schedule is a lot more confusing for people. You don't know what's happening. And so your responding cannot adhere to the contingencies as easily. Eventually it can, but not as easily as it does in the multiple schedule. So that is what was going on there. So their conclusion was, if you need to choose one to do your thinning approach, they recommend going with a multiple schedule. That's what happened in 2001.
Excellent. So now we have a promising schedule thinning procedure. But what will happen next? Why does it work? Is it still state of the art all those years ago? Let's take a quick break and come back and discuss more. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there!
And we are back talking about schedule thinning and functional communication responses. But before we continue our discussion around this topic, I want to remind our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved, and by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click on the link in your podcast player. Put in some key information as well as 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first one now. It is granola. Granola.
I've been really loving this gluten-free hazelnut granola recently.
Granola, if you get enough good
Sounds
stuff
really
on
good.
it, it's great.
Mm.
It's oaty and has dried fruit sometimes and brown sugar, all sorts of good stuff. Fun snack. Granola. All right, let's continue our discussion about schedule thinning. And we're going to move forward, 12 years to Betts et al.'s article, looking a little bit more at a component analysis of schedule thinning. All right, so we know we've got our socially mediated consequences from our FA. We know we've got our functional communication treatment plan. We start with our dense schedule reinforcer delivery. You see problem behavior, the EO for problem behavior weakening. You probably don't see an extinction burst, and then you start your schedule thinning, right? You hopefully get to that lower rate of FCR while maintaining the strength of the response as well as avoiding any resurgence. And now we know, 12 years later, we know that a signal of the stimulus control of the functional communication. So that signal of what are the alternating periods when the response will be reinforced tends to be effective for thinning the schedule at least to some sort of a 60-40 ratio, which is not too shabby in the grand scheme of things. So this works, but the question is why? Is it that the individuals sort of just had this brief exposure to signaled extinction and then it was gradually lengthened over time and they sort of just habituated to this EO? Or was it maybe that those schedules just were discriminable enough for the individual between reinforcement and extinction or the availability of each schedule that gradual increase really wasn't that important because they knew what was going on and they understood the contingency at play and would have just engaged in the exact same rate of responding and low rate of problem behavior. So no resurgence. Basically, can we do this even faster is the question. So the goal here was to do a little mini component analysis of this multiple schedule procedure to see, okay, what is the most useful in reaching that treatment goal of the thinned schedule? We need to maintain low levels of problem behavior. We need to have reductions in the rate of functional communication responses, but not such a reduction that the individual stops engaging in this new acquired response. And we have to look, is there some sort of discriminated responding or is something else going on to make this procedure effective? All right, big caveat. We talked about this at the top of the show. This article, it's not 2001 anymore, folks. 2013, you're going to give me 3 experiments? No, it's not okay. And the first 2 pretty much just replicate Hanley and Iwata and Thompson. We don't need all those experiments. Just get to the meat. Get to the last experiment. Experiment 3.
No appetizer experiments.
Don't need all of this. It's like back when they're like, oh, I'm going to tell you all about my FA. It's like, no, we understand how an FA works.
I'm going to tell you about all 5 conditions.
If you tell me I did an FA, thumbs up emoji, I'll trust you. You got through peer review. Probably your results were fine. Okay. So in this study, we've got 4 individuals that were, it's part of a program to treat severe problem behavior from ages 5 to 9. A lot of different diagnoses: ADHD, OCD, bipolar, PDD, NOS. There are all sorts of different target problem behaviors, including aggression, disruption and elopement, all sorts of different FCRs. Can I have my way, please? My way, please. And the responses, or the data collected, really was the second by second data on frequency of problem behavior, frequency of functional communication responses, and then looking at whether these rates were occurring more, less, how much during the reinforcement or extinction components of whatever schedule was at play. Because again, we're going to come back to our friends, multiple and mixed schedules. So experiment 1, it's an FA and treatment. Guess what? It worked. Wow, great job. Let's move on to experiment 2.
Good job, team.
We did it, everyone. We did it. We replicated old research from the 80s.
Also helpful, but
Also important to determine function.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't determine function. I am saying I don't need, put a footnote.
we don't need to talk about it.
Put a footnote of like, don't
know.
worry, we totally did an
We're just
FA
kidding.
and an FCT. It was effective.
Okay, tell us about the important part.
All right. Experiment 2, sort of again, looking at rates of functional communication responses using the mixed versus the multiple schedule. You had, multiple 60-60 schedule with 60 seconds with reinforcement available, 60 seconds with reinforcement not available, so extinction.
You said that much better than me.
Oh, well, I'm saying it very fast, so maybe it just sounded better.
It's on 2-speed.
And then we've got our same, mixed 60-60 schedule. And the difference here was in the multiple, it was like, look, this picture's on the wall and I'm wearing a vest, therefore reinforcement or extinction. Whereas mixed, it's like, if you ask for this thing, I'll give it to you for a little bit. And then, you know what? For a little bit, I'm not going to give it to you. That's kind of all you got.
Vest for So 2013.
Yep. That's what you needed. And again, we got similar.
Jackie has no response.
It's like, I love vests.
They're still good. They're
I
coming
don't
back
own
around.
any, but I'm going to buy some now.
Oh, yeah?
I only have one. Like a puffer vest.
Oh, yeah.
But I want like best vests.
I was reading a magazine from last year and they said vests are coming back, and I don't think they're back.
They never came back.
No.
didn't
I've
make
not
it.
seen any vests.
Right. I know. So we'll see. If you listen to this from a year from now, please
Yeah, right back in
go
time.
back in time and tell us.
All right. So what are our results? And we have these 2 different schedules. Pretty much like from the last study, we saw, decently low rates of problem behavior across both schedules. Though, again, you saw consistently low rates of problem behavior during the multiple schedule. So it was like 90% reduction, whereas only about 75% reduction for the mixed. You saw some differentiation immediately for the multiple schedule, which you did not see in the mixed. And when they looked at the cumulative records of responding during the mixed schedule, they tried to see a pattern. And it sort of came out that the individuals were making their first response almost always during the extinction component of the schedule. And so it was way higher than chance. It was like 81% of the time. And then they kind of wouldn't resume responding until it was the next extinction. So there was some sort of rule where if I don't get my FCR, if it doesn't work, then I guess it's not going to work anymore, because that's sort of the schedule that they had. It's a little weird that problem behavior would stay as low as it was, but hey, there we go. So it does seem that the issue is the discrimination. If you're not able to discriminate what schedule you're in, you don't see consistent rates of functional communication responses, and you potentially will see resurgence as those schedules thin over time.
And sometimes people note that as an issue with FAs as well, if you get idiosyncratic results, maybe
Right.
because there's not discrimination of conditions.
So now experiment 3, which is the big one of, all right, if we know discrimination is key in our schedule thinning procedure, how does that play into the length of treatment needed? Do we really need to gradually extend that extinction interval? Or could you just make sure you've got good enough discrimination going on and say, hey, everyone, we're going to the Super Bowl of schedule thinning right off the bat and get exactly the same responses as you would have if you'd done that gradual thinning?
I didn't tell you in my study, they did do a terminal schedule probe, and it was not effective before they did the thinning. But proceed.
Yes, but perhaps they didn't teach the discrimination well enough. Who knows? It's so many years ago. There's
The
no way to
plot
know.
thickens.
So this was a multiple baseline across participants. We've got our same participants, 2 sets of them. One did the multiple 60-60 condition as their baseline. One did the mixed 60-60 for their baseline. Then everyone did the multiple condition. It was a 60 reinforcement on, 240 seconds reinforcement off, so extinction, right? And what happened? Well, in the multiple 60-60 baseline, guess what? High stable rates of FCR, and then no problem behavior during extinction. or almost no problem behavior during extinction, and no FCR during extinction, pretty much right off the bat. Going to the terminal schedule right away, you saw relatively high but kind of variable rates of FCR and reinforcement, and none in extinction, other than one session where there were 2 FCRs, they noted. One participant, they did see a slight increase in some variability in rates of problem behavior during that terminal schedule. The other, perfectly fine. Everything's going great. So they were able to make that big jump. The mixed group, however, in baseline, you saw one participant having no differentiation between responding in the reinforcement and extinction conditions, low FCR pretty much throughout the whole, that portion of the experiment. When they went to the terminal schedule, however, they saw high and stable functional communication in the reinforcement and saw almost none during extinction. The other one, you saw higher rates of FCR during extinction component to start. And then when they went to that terminal multiple schedule, again, the rates of FCR and extinction dropped to near zero and started becoming high and stable rates in reinforcement. No problem behavior other than like one session for baseline or the terminal schedule. So it's not that the mixed schedule doesn't work, it's that it doesn't work as well and potentially wouldn't work at all, but at least in these limited studies. But for all of them, no matter what, as long as you had discriminable schedules, they were able to reach that terminal schedule almost immediately after the initial training. So it seems that the signaling of the schedule, the discriminability of the schedules is really the key to speeding up the schedule thinning process. It took them only 2 steps to get to their goal versus, as they note, Hanley took 7 steps to get there. Oh my. Which I'm sure they didn't mean it to be, we did a better job than this because this is much later. But still, it's always hard to compare one's research from something from 12 years ago. So multiple schedules, that's what you need. You need to teach good discrimination. You need to have good SDs in your early stages. And then you may be able to, and it seems like in many, many, many cases, you can jump right to that terminal schedule. I think that's going to be within reason, though. Your mileage is going to vary exactly what the terminal schedule is going to be.
Why MMV?
I don't know what that is. You need to specify what you are talking about if you're just going to throw out an acronym.
Oh, it's your mileage may vary.
Oh, okay.
People put that on the internet sometimes.
Do they?
Yes.
Okay.
So now you can just say that instead.
No, I don't want to say that.
Oh, okay, fine.
I choose not to.
I do think that you're still going to get idiosyncratic results based on your participant and their individual characteristics, the salience of the stimuli that you're using in order to establish the discriminative response, etc. And it's not going to be the same for everybody.
Well, and one of their big questions was, all right, so we have a lot of participants across these studies who had established speaker and listener repertoires. There's some amount of rule-governed behavior potentially at play here.
Yeah. And
you need to be able to have some amount of, discriminative control of behavior at play. So depending on your participants, you may not get these results.
Right. And those
are
participants
two factors.
in Hanley's study had really high support needs. They had very, very limited functional communication at all. And they were adults as well. So they had long, presumably long opportunities for learning histories. Mm-hmm. So I think that they may have been a subset of the population for whom this type of discriminative learning could be even more challenging.
Yeah. And then, and then certainly looking at broadening this to lots of other environments, I think the better you could add rules to the discriminations. You might see even bigger jumps or longer jumps or less training time required to still get the same results. But if most of your behavior does not kind of follow patterns of rule-governed behavior, you're going to probably need to do some amount of actual practice during the thinning. But who knows how much? But it can be done. And the discrimination of the schedules seems to be part of it.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Rob.
Let's talk a little bit more about this subject, and then we'll bring it on home with the most recent article, which is just a great list of updated recommendations.
I love it. But the first recommendations were outlined by Greer and colleagues in 2016. And they looked at the 4 ways that you can thin a reinforcement schedule. Number 1, we all know, use a multiple schedule.
Say what?
I know.
We just
Number
talked
2,
about it.
which we haven't
I wasn't listening.
Yeah, which we haven't talked about is response restriction. And this can only happen if it is something that you can take away, right? So it's not really great for like a vocal verbal repertoire, but it would be effective for like a picture exchange communication.
Right.
So
but
if
still, would you want to?
No, I wouldn't, but it's one of the ones that they talked about.
Okay.
Where you just withhold the materials in times where reinforcement's unavailable.
Yeah,
The
don't like
third
that, though.
is using a chain schedule or demand fading. And this is an option for increasing the response requirement.
I promised listeners we weren't going to talk about chain schedules.
Well, it's not a real chain schedule. It's not a chain schedule of reinforcement. It's a chain schedule of responses.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah. And this is helpful if challenging behavior is maintained by negative reinforcement. And then the fourth one is waiting for an increasing amount of time before the response is reinforced. But the authors do not love this one. So they're like, no one likes it.
Yeah.
Everybody hates it. We're not even going to talk about it anymore. So
Okay, great.
there we go. So what they wanted to look at is whether if they looked at all of the applications that their clinic had that used FCT, all of them, what would they find? Because previous research didn't use everything, so they were maybe they left some out. So we're going to use all of the applications. They did a records review. Man, records review are amazing, right? You're like, I'm just going to look at this. I should have done that for everything.
We got a record player recently, so it would make our job a lot easier when we did that record review.
Right. They just look at all the clients' They look at all the clients' outcome data and the treatment. They made a preliminary list of all the clients, the outcome that used FCT and thinning, and then they looked at every single individual data.
Yeah.
But
Easy.
You can do that at home.
Easy.
In front of the TV. So they looked for behavior that was maintained by social mediation. They had the FCT that evaluated signal components, and reinforcement decreased across sessions, and if there was IOA. So they found 25 consecutive applications across 20 cases. And really, all you need to know here is that they did an FA. Bam.
Please describe that FA.
We don't need to know it. The baseline just was similar to the FA, where reinforcement was provided following the target behavior. They taught the relative FCR in FCT. Then they made sure that the student was engaging in that functional communication response without prompts. Then they looked at the 3 treatments, a multiple FCT, and they had like color cards or laminated cards, a chained FCT or the RR FCT, where they took away the materials. And
that's response restriction.
Response restriction, okay. Yep. And sometimes if the FCT did not work, they had to add some supplementary stimuli. Here, if it failed to produce 80 to 90% of clinical reductions. And what they found was the FCT with schedule thinning had a mean reduction of 96% of problem behavior without punishment or alternative reinforcement.
It's pretty good.
Across all of these signal components, they said that the compound schedules employed produced at least 90% reduction, and 73 of them applications had at least 80% reduction. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
In problem behavior. And
so it wasn't just the 2 studies we've already talked about.
Nope, it wasn't just the 2 studies. And I think the one part that was a tiny bit different that they, I think, should have spent a lot more time on, but they didn't, was that they also talked about the delay to reinforcement and how long that took, because their whole premise is in the introduction, like caregivers need to know how to thin the reinforcer. And then it's just like a tiny little blurb that they got the toleration for delayed reinforcement for 4 minutes without significant increases in problem behaviors, which is like long, but really short.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, yay.
Well, yes.
But like really short in real life.
Because when you start at 1 second, it seems like a lot to make it to,
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
Right.
But yes, in real life, it's not that long.
I mean, I can sneeze for 4 minutes. So they were very excited that they used FCT in each and every case and eliminated case bias, but also provided that information. I would have loved to see a little bit more on like their caregiver rationale in the discussion. Yeah. But that's really all.
Excellent.
Good job.
Now,
high five.
As much as we still have Kranak and Brown's 2023 updated recommendations to talk about, I'm wondering,
which is a great article.
Do we want to just move into the dissemination station and just put this one squarely in the end? Let's do that.
That's what it is.
Let's do that.
Kranak and Brown.
We're heading into the Kranak and Brown station.
Kranak and Brown station.
Oh wow, we're in a new era.
Wow!
But only today.
Only today.
Okay.
So here we are, the dissemination station. And in dissemination station, if you're new to the show, we tend to take all of the research we've been discussing and sort of discuss some more extensions, future research ideas, and sum everything up. But when we have an article that does all that for us, great, we'll just sum up the summary.
I know.
And we'll do it here.
And one thing I love about this article that I'm glad that they added now in the 2023s was the idea that FCT doesn't have to be done with extinction, right? Because all these study priors in the 2000s to 2010s, it just was inherent that extinction was embedded, and it wasn't even a thought that you might want to consider using FCT without extinction. So I love that they brought that in there.
Love that too.
All right. So they certainly start off by talking about how great multiple schedules are. And we've done that a lot. So let's continue. That's an assumed multiple schedules, stimulus control.
They also said delay
Good
schedules
stuff.
were not so great.
No.
Just like everyone else. Everyone agrees.
We have consensus across the articles this time, which
never
is
happens.
Nice. Yeah.
The chain schedules are probably going to be your best bet for problem behavior maintained by negative reinforcement. And
it means you got to complete something first before you can then access the period of reinforcement.
Similar to my study.
Yes.
That's what they said as well.
And then they talk about some different modifications. So they talk about some, kind of variations on the theme. So one, which is not a phrase I'd heard, is the probabilistic delay tolerance approach, where your FCRs are intermittently reinforced and are sometimes on extinction, and using some sort of naturalistic stimuli like a statement, wait, or no, you can't do that right now, teaching a tolerance response after some sort of extinction signal. If no, you can't, they say like, okay, or that's fine, or no problem, or high five.
Certainly heard of that.
I've never heard about it referred to as a probabilistic delay tolerance approach, though, but that's pretty much the process you see in your skills-based training.
Yes,
package.
or delay denial training, sometimes, as it's sometimes called.
However it's called. We got to come up with some consistent terms. I feel like those are still a little bit in flux. You also could add other DRA contingencies in the delay interval. So, we kind of talked about how that 4 minutes of extinction is really great, but 4 minutes is not very long in the grand scheme of things. So, okay, can we add in some DRO or DRA contingencies during a delay interval? Maybe having both of them, in place, which would be great for real life when you do need longer than 4 minutes before reinforcing a functional communication response. So that was another addition that really hadn't been talked about in the previous articles, because I think some of those lines of research were a little more recent. We talked about not needing extinction necessarily, especially if extinction is not possible. It's good to know you don't necessarily need it in play. In most cases, you do not need it. So certainly for behavior where you have like elopement or something that's very dangerous behavior where you're not really going to be able to stop reinforcement for the problem behavior due to the danger of it continuing to occur. And then the question comes up, well, schedule thinning. We know it works. We love multiple schedules. That tends to be the best, especially for that kind of positive social reinforcement function. But how do you pace yourself? And Kranak and Brown recommend, well, let's determine what is the allowable amount of problem behavior that we can all tolerate, that everyone agrees, stakeholders, maybe the client, hopefully the client as well. And that'll let you know, okay, do we keep thinning or do we need to pause? This is more going to be the case for dense to lean schedule thinning, though even with kind of making those big jumps to the terminal schedule that you'd see in the multiple, when you have your multiple schedule in play, you could probably decide, okay, here's our final goal. Here's where we're kind of worried. Let's try that first. No problem behavior. Great. High rates of FCR, or at least decent rates of FCR. Great. Keep moving to the next one. So you can kind of take steps until you get to your terminal goal.
It takes a long time, though.
It can take a long time. Again, that terminal probe schedule thinning, I think I kind of accidentally described that one while I was describing the first one, but that's fine because that's just, hey, let's do a probe. Let's just see what's the latency to the first instance of problem behavior and then schedule thin right before that time. So that's probably a good idea. Again, you could do the rapid schedule thing. All of these are kind of variations on the theme. So the rapid schedule thinning, like in bets, just make sure you have good discriminated responding for your SD and S delta periods of FCR, and then say, here we go to the terminal schedule. But again, it sounds like there haven't been any replications of bets at all since 2013. So those generality problems we were talking about, those still may be huge problems.
Yeah, and that's a great thesis.
Yeah.
Right there. Come on, students. Hop on it.
We're never short on thesis ideas around these parts.
Then they kind of come up with like, what if we smoosh them together? We'll get a progressive interval assessment where you identify what's the longest duration of extinction before problem behavior. Okay, then we'll do schedule thinning, kind of the slow, old-fashioned way at that point. And if we don't see problem behavior, okay, then we'll kind of keep increasing that schedule with some sort of like a 4:1 ratio they recommend of access to the reinforcer relative to signaling extinction. And there you go. That's your process. No problem behavior. You keep going, which again kind of seems like that's a great idea. What if we just teach the discrimination, try to go for broke as best as we can? If we can't, back it up. Where's that latency? And then go from there. That's still going to be a lot faster than assuming you need to start at the 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, 10 second. Just like, let's get to the end, see how well that goes. If that goes really well, maybe try farther, maybe not. Depends on the setting. A lot of environmental variables there. The question was asked in the article and it answered, what are the chances of resurgence in schedule thinning? And again, previous studies had really high rates of resurgence in the studies. So it would be 73% and 92%
That's
in
high.
one study, which is really high.
That's like sadly high.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to read that. And you're like, I spent all of this time, this lengthy process, thinning my schedule only for it to have returned.
Yep.
But they do recommend that certainly, again, if you can increase that discrimination of when the schedules are in play, which again, usually is probably going to happen in the context of like highly trained staff, maybe a clinic or high level of oversight, you will probably see less chance of resurgence. So again, the more the individual discriminates which schedule is in play, the less chance you're going to see resurgence. Also, potentially using alternate items during that extinction period. So getting access to something that's not the primary reinforcer or the reinforcer of problem behavior might be a good addition to that. And then they discuss some supplemental procedures that might be useful. Certainly discriminative stimuli for the different schedules, which we talked a lot about. They bring up response restriction if the individual is having trouble with discrimination in tasks. They sort of talk a little bit about what could this look like, or what are the correlated skills that seem to decrease the chance of resurgence. They say like color identification, verbal skills, those are skills, prerequisites to probably making those big terminal jumps. Otherwise, you may want to try your kind of fading classic schedule thinning. There's only one study. I'm shocked about this because this feels like the grail of schedule thinning of can we transfer stimulus control to naturalistic study? And there was a study by Brown and Nerkesian in 2023 where they did a stimulus fading procedure to some sort of like vocal verbal delay statement. And it worked for some of their participants, or at least it said it worked for 2. I didn't write down how many total participants they had. I can't remember if it was in this study. But it did seem to be something worth looking at because, again, wouldn't we want to be able to just sort of have something in the environment cueing it rather than like needing to have all these like pictures and the adult needs to be there. And if they're not there, student or the learner won't know which schedule is in play. And then also some work on what are some competing stimuli that could be used, other activities during the extinction periods, non-targeted functional reinforcers or non-functional reinforcers, items within that same response class maybe could be present. But we also have the question of what about demands? And spoiler alert, if you were not surprised, if you have someone's functional communication on extinction and just give them stuff they don't like to do, you probably will see problem behavior.
Yep.
So you're going to want to be looking at, is it possible to have any problem behavior? And if the answer is no, don't try to add demands to fill the void. It's not going to go so well. Preferred items or competing items are really where you want to be focusing that time. Not that demands aren't important and everyone has to respond to certain demands, but that's not the time. Some kind of future questions are going to be, what about modalities of FCR? Do different individuals prefer different modalities of FCR?
People have talked about in the past, like even if you are vocal verbal, maybe using an exchange card could be less response effort.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and when you're teaching an FCR, you want to pick the least responsive option, response effortful option. So yeah. That's that then.
So that's something to look at. Is punishment needed in these procedures? And again, there's always a possibility. However, current research using these procedures
try other things
does
first.
not point to it needing to be a component of your package.
Right? We know it's 100% of the time effective because that's what punishment is, but it comes with a whole slew of side effects, right? And you want to make sure that that people like you when you show up.
Yeah, many challenges there.
Yeah. There's a whole section about quantitative models, which I don't want to get into. Please read at your own Risk? No. But again, we're talking about behavioral momentum theory.
Some Behan's work was in there that I'm sure is excellent.
It sounds like one of those things that if someone showed it to me, I'd be like, that's so cool. And they'd be like, yeah, no, you only need to do all this extra work to make it happen. I'm like, I don't know if that's for me.
I shut down.
Yeah. Well, it's important that we understand these things from on a theoretical level and from a research perspective. But you also got to figure out what are the take-home points for me as a clinician. And it sounds like use a multiple schedule.
Yeah.
Yep. Use a multiple schedule or a chain schedule if it is a negatively reinforced behavior. Yep.
And some miscellany. Again, if you want to know, well, which of these procedures should I use? It's really going to come down to, severity of problem behavior is going to be a part of it. How well can it be managed? If there's a lot of highly severe problem behavior, you're going to have to use more of a dense to lean pacing procedure, probably. If not, or if you think that you can manage the problem behavior very effectively, you could try fixed to lean schedule thinning, or just start probing some of those leaner schedules. Question of how many steps before I move on to thinning? Not definitive. I wrote in my notes, at least 2 maybe is kind of the recommendation in the study, but that was not based on anything other
People
than
usually do 2 or 3
opinion.
usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 3 seems too much, 1 seems too little, 2 is in the middle.
Yeah. Should we go back steps if the skills get lost? So FCR drops or problem behavior increases. And the thought is you can change your pacing procedures. Don't feel like, well, I started dense to lean, I have to keep going with this, or I did lean to dense. I got to, you can revert, you can kind of go back, recapture the effects, add other components to sustain those reductions in problem behavior, those, increases in, the FCR skill. So again, don't feel stuck if you picked one. It's not like now you're legally required to ride it all the way out.
You aren't.
No, you are not. And again, then they have some good ideas for future research. We talked about a few of them, around subject characteristics. Is there any sort of way to better predict which pacing procedures are going to be better or not? Like, are there predictive behavioral markers, which that I would guess would be pretty idiosyncratic. There may be some things that we can use. So certainly like rule-governed behavior to do some jumps to the terminal schedule, I think would be one to keep an eye out for. There aren't a lot of studies saying which procedure is the best in effectiveness and efficiency. They all seem to work to some extent. Well, not all of them, but a number of the ones we spent most of the time talking about work to some extent. So it's going to come down to some of those other factors like intensity of problem behavior, some of those prerequisites around rule-governed behavior or ability to discriminate conditions. And then should we use our quantitative models? I don't know. That's someone else can decide that, RAC and context, all that good stuff. That's fun for the future. And that brings us to the end of our schedule thinning. Any other final thoughts?
Yay.
That's a good thought.
That's my thought. I think for once in a very long time, we have some definitive answers in a way that we don't usually.
Yeah.
And that is lovely. I feel like I could actually go and start doing this now. As long as I understand the concept of multiple schedule.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like you see this series of undertakings as far as procedures in many different studies and in many different camps of people who, operate behavior analytically. So sometimes it might be called different things or get kind of like set up in different ways within a learning structure, but it's all coming down to the same components here. And ultimately, this is going to be helpful and beneficial for your clients that you're able to thin out some of those really important FCRs once they're established so that they can then contact reinforcement in other ways in their learning environment. So it's all for the good of the clients, no matter what we call it or how it's structured.
Yeah. Well, let's leave the Kranak and Brown dissemination station.
Good job, Kranak and Brown.
Continue on to the last section of the show, pairings.
Wow.
Dinah, what's pairings?
It was just a hop, skip, and a jump over here to get to pairings. There's no special music for pairings, but it's a section of the show where I tell you about other episodes you might want to go back and check out now that you enjoyed this one. So this is a topic we have touched on in various formats several times, in fact. So I'm going to tell you what those times are. They include going all the way back to episode 28, where we initially talked about functional communication training. Also, we talked about instructional fading. That was in episode 101. We touched on that today as well. In episode 138, we were joined by Dr. Jeff Tiger, and we talked about delay tolerance. You guys remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And then in episode 181, I wrote it twice. We were joined by Dr. Mashid Gamagami, and we talked about contingencies in tolerance training. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah, we did that too. And then in episode 231, we were joined by Dr. Joey Staubitz, and we talked about EBDB and varying components that made up emotional behavioral intervention. And some of that included PFA, baseline classroom, delay tolerance training stuff. So I threw that one in here too to think about application. And then finally, quite recently, we talked about in episode 249, looking at DRA minus extinction or DRA without extinction. So that may be relevant here too. Another part of pairings is not just telling you episodes, but also a snack that you can enjoy while you listen. And you're going to love both of these because they're both delicious. Two delicious snacks for today: Wheat Thins and Thin Mints.
Oh,
Boom.
Yep.
Thinning.
There we go. Thank you for coming to Pairings.
wow. Do you think it odd that symbolically, usually I think our episodes of the show, you have to sort of start at the beginning and then kind of go through the whole thing to get the whole story of the topic. But this might actually be an episode where you could have just jumped to the terminal schedule of, I just want to go to the dissemination station part.
That's true.
And
You
gotten
could have.
everything you needed for listening to it. That's pretty interesting. Not usually the case. And I think you lose a lot of context. But
No, you should probably listen to the whole thing.
if you're just like, I need to listen to something that's like 10 minutes long, you could probably have jumped to dissemination station and just gotten that information, though you wouldn't have gotten it until you listened to the whole thing anyway. So it's a mixed schedule. We mixed the schedule on this podcast. We did it. There's our example.
All right, the end.
That's it. All right. And if you did that, you also would not be able to earn 1 learning credit for listening. And to do so, you're also going to have to get this second secret code word. It is coconut. COCONUT. You want to consider the coconut when putting in all your keywords.
Yummy.
Yeah.
I'm going to put the lime in the coconut.
But you could if you had a real coconut. If you're just typing it in your computer, don't put lime on your computer. It's bad for that. Don't do that. All right, coconut. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you all so very much for listening. We'd really appreciate it if you rated our show, ABA Inside Track, on Apple Podcasts. Or
It's 5 stars. I love when people say that.
Yeah.
Rate my show 5 stars.
5 stars. If you want to give us 1 star, email us first and let's have a conversation about what we did wrong and how we can improve. If you thought we were great, you can email us as well. But 5 stars is nice. We appreciate it. Thank you. You can also find us a lot of other places online. We're on social media as ABA Inside Track. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to get links to all of the articles that we discussed in this episode, as well as our previous episodes. And that's, of course, if you are interested in purchasing CEs from us, that's where you need to go to do all of that. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, including 2-hour-long book club episodes once a season, listener choice episodes, not like, people email a bunch of times, but like you get to vote on a topic. We have some new ones coming up. You're going to want to join us and subscribe on our Patreon page, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe. Apparently you can subscribe as free members because a lot of people have been doing that, which is really, really cool.
Huh.
I know. I think that opens up some choices. I think that's a new thing Patreon's doing.
Didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Welcome.
So if you want to just follow us there for fun, that's awesome. If you would like discounts and a chance to vote on all sorts of things and access to a lot of our episodes up to a year ahead of time and our regular episodes a week ahead of time and some free CEs, you can subscribe as low as $5. And that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. If you want to jump over there right now, you'll be able to hear some full-length book club episodes, including our upcoming book club on picture activity schedules. We're going to be reading a whole book about that. I know. I was just surprised Jackie because I forgot to tell her that's the one that won the poll.
Picture schedule.
We just found that out in real life yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And of course, you can always email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. Some final but much needed thanks. Big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his great editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.